Howdy, soldiers. I feel a little like between the hair and the mug and the billowy linen shirt, it's giving coastal grandma, but like coastal grandma if she slayed dragons. And if that's not a vibe. And of course, the moment that I start filming on a random day that I usually do not film, they have started doing some kind of sawing or like grass cutting outside. So if you hear noise in the background, I'm very sorry. Please feel free to complain to the city of Vancouver. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on wanting to like Romantasy, and that got a good amount of views and a great amount of comments. At the end, I originally recommended books that I loved that were romantic fantasies, and the video was just too long, and I, at that point, was so sleep-deprived and over-caffeinated that I made zero sense. So for the sake of my sanity and YouTube watch time, I decided to cut off that part of the video and instead make its own dedicated video, so here we are today. Now, if you haven't watched that video, you should go and watch it. But TLDR is that the word romantasy is a portmanteau for romance and fantasy. However, marketing SEO people have twisted it so that it really is indicative of the wrong thing. Romantic fantasy and fantasy romance are two different things, and so technically romantasy in colloquial terms is describing a romantic fantasy, but really it actually is describing a fantasy romance. Whether you're a romance reader or a fantasy reader will go into a book having different sets of expectations. And so if you go into a book that you think is going to be more fantastical and then it's more romantic, you might be disappointed or you feel like it was a catfish. Romantasy as a genre is a catfish. Where's the line between fantasy romance and paranormal romance and like light magic romance? Because authors like J.R. Ward or Mercedes Lackey, like they've been doing this for a long time. Like SJM did not invent the idea of fantasy romance. And then what even is romance? Is that physical intimacy? Is that mental intimacy? Is that kissing? Is that sex? And what kind of sex? Like there's just this whole wide array of things that fall under the romance umbrella. God, the people who make Venn diagrams are losing their minds right now. But regardless, I wanted to make a video talking about my favorite romantic fantasy books because I think when people hear the term romantasy, they are expecting a fantasy book first and foremost that has romance, because that's what I was expecting, and that's the kind of book that I personally want to read. Like I, as you maybe can see behind me, have been reading fantasy novels with romance subplots in them for a very long time. Those have not been called romantasy because the term romantasy is a very new online term. Technically, I've been reading romantic fantasy books for like my whole life. So if you're like me and you love high fantasy secondary worlds that also have characters kiss a little or more, maybe stick around. And I don't have a definitive ranking system or like specific categories, but I do have an array of books that cover different spice levels and different romance levels, all while still being fantasy books. So without further ado, grab a drink, grab a snack, and buckle in as we go over an array of romantic fantasy novels as picked and read by yours truly. We're gonna start out with, oh wow, just heard my Canadian accent come out there, wow. We're going to start out with the least spicy, the plain spaghetti, if you will, of fantasy romance books. That's so mean, I shouldn't say that. A delicious and flavorful romantic fantasy that does not have spice. It is the green Thai curry of romantasy. Because the term romantasy is used very specifically to describe sexy books, whereas romance books can have that or cannot have that and instead just focus on like the emotional connection. One of the most magical and romantic books that I own is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a great low fantasy if you want to get into fantasy romance books, but you don't want to go fully like orcs and elves having orgies. I totally understand you. As you can imagine, this centers the Cirque du Rêve, the Circus of Dreams. I'm so sorry for my atrocious French. Where dreams are seen, wishes are granted, and fantastical performances abound, but only for a night. All within a historical magic realism setting. And our main lovebirds, Celia and Marco, are the children of two rival magicians who are unknowingly pitted against each other in a competition to see who can create the biggest and the most magical piece to the circus. But they don't know that if they don't compete well, then like something bad's gonna happen, but they can't help but be drawn to one another and fall in love. It goes into not only falling in love with someone, but falling in love with their dreams. This like fairy tale vibe to it as well that is just so darkly dazzling and mesmerizing. But if you're not a historical fiction person or you want something that is more high fantasy, but still kind of like lower spice levels or more high romance, I would highly suggest Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This is a retelling of the Chinese folktale of Shangge and Hao Yi, with Daughter of the Moon Goddess Xing Yin escaping the moon to join the magical celestial army in hopes of getting a favor from the emperor to free her mother. And even though, yes, there is romance in it, Xing Yin does not need a man, okay? She is the most S-tier, grade 1 badass there ever was. She has this giant jade bow from legend that she is just slinging around, pulling heists, rescuing immortals, slaying beasts of the other world. But there is a big romance plot. We get a love triangle that I do not hate between the captain of the guard, Captain General? Oops, it's been a little while since I read this. With Captain Wang Ji and Prince Li Wei. Very sorry if I mispronounced those. And I appreciate this love triangle because neither man is trying to hold back Xing Yin, but at the same time, both of them appeal to different sides of her. And so it's kind of a like, what do you want versus what do you need? But also, do we have to make compromises? Poly-power throuple is an option. So these are both great fantasy books that have a lower stakes romantic subplot and less spice in them if you just want to focus on the fantasy. But if you want something like this, but like one step up, may I recommend, first of all, the Married to Magic series by Elise Kova. Oh, I'm missing one. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. I forgot about Siren Duke. And no, I don't know what happened between these ones. I ordered them all at the same time. So we have a high fantasy secondary world, multiple secondary worlds actually, where the romance directly interferes with the plot. You cannot have the plot without the romance. And romantic they are. Good God, Elise Kova knows how to sweep a girl off her feet. This is an interconnected series, so you can just read them as standalones if you like. You got Deal with the Elf King, which is elves, loose retelling of Hades and Persephone. Dance with the Fae Prince, fairies, very loose retelling of Eros and Psyche / Cinderella. Deal with the Vampire Lord, my reigning favorite, which is just vampires, but some of the sickest vampire lore I've ever read. Holy shit, why is this book so good? And Duet with the Siren Duke, which is merpeople, which from what I understand is like a slight gender bending of The Little Mermaid. As somebody who has read a lot of very toxic men in romance novels, I super love the men in these books, although I have an eye on you, Davian from Fae Prince, just saying. Everybody in here talks about their feelings, and it's great. I love that we have nuanced discussions. Now, there is some more spice in here. You know, we've kicked it up a notch from Night Circus. These are like a yellow curry. Like, not burn your mouth off hot, but like you're starting to feel it. Highly recommend if you want an adventure fantasy where the characters also kiss. Something along similar lines that I just finished that I really enjoyed was Radiance by Grace Draven. This, I suppose, is like monster romance light. We follow two spare heirs to thrones of both the human kingdom and the Kai kingdom. And the best way to describe the Kai are like orcs and elves, but sexy. Where Adilko and Brishan enter into this arranged marriage that neither of them really wants, but surprise turn of events, they do not hate each other, and it becomes this beautiful, like, strangers to friends to lovers story where they both learn to love one another and like care for them and their friends, and then they like genuinely want to help the other person adapt to their culture. It's beautiful. And even though at the beginning we have some reservations about how the other person looks, because the Kai are like really tall and have like giant eyes and like gray skin and like claws and fangs, and then humans, like, we have blunt teeth and apparently weird eyes. Even though the other person might look a little weird, doesn't change the fact that we can get down a little bit with it later. This is like lower middle tier spicy. This is one of the most romantic romantasy books that I have ever read. The way that Brishan and Idilko just like learn more about each other and slowly fall in love is so incredibly sweet. And then the way by the end of it, like, they would do anything for one another is, oh my God, my heart. Now, if you're a fan of a slow burn romance, then I have a stack of books for you. These books start off focusing more on the fantasy element or the political fantasy before the romance really starts to ramp up. I have to include these first two as a duo because in my mind, they are twins, and that is A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows and A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. Are you kidding me? I left for 20 minutes and they're still weed whacking? Sorry for the abrupt cut there, but yeah, they were really loud, so I went and made myself a third caffeinated beverage of the day before 2 p.m. Was this a bad idea? I don't know. A Strange and Stubborn Endurance is another political arranged marriage novel between Kay and Vel, two minor nobles who were not expecting to be put in this marriage, but then, of course, once we get to know each other and, like, learn more about each other, we fall in love. But also, some people don't want the marriage to go through because of the way that people look at homosexuality in different kingdoms. And this book in particular, I would say check trigger warnings for, because there is a lot in here on homophobia and assault and PTSD and internalized homophobia. Vel comes from a kingdom that looked down on being gay, and he was actually supposed to marry the princess, but then when it comes out in this scandal that he's queer, he gets married off to the other kingdom's prince instead because they don't care. But then, like, once he's there, there's this whole, like, internal whole thing that he has to go through, and it's really wonderful to watch him grow, and especially watch the love that Kay has for him grow. And then A Taste of Gold and Iron centers a slightly forbidden relationship between a prince and the ambassador's bodyguard of another kingdom, as the two of them are kind of roped in to helping solve a series of crime. Because Kato and Evermer are from different kingdoms, there is a lot of stuff in here on, like, duty and love, but also there's super interesting dynamics of how they look at relationships. Like, particularly Kato's culture has a really interesting way of structuring family, and also he is able to touch taste metals to see if they're real or not, which is a very cool magic. And Kato is really shy and ever does not let anyone within his, like, emotional walls, so watching the two of them slowly fall for one another is just, like, so wonderful to behold. So if you want some books that have some complicated gays and some high politicking, I'd recommend both of these immensely. Speaking of queer fantasy, next up I have a whole trio for you. The marvelously queer The Last Binding trilogy by Freya Marsk. Marvelous Light, gay. Power and Bound, also gay. Restless Truth, sapphic. A trio of historical fantasy novels that can all be read as separate books, that all center the crime and corruption of the high magical society of England. I love how Britain can't even escape its crimes in fantasy novels. In A Marvelous Light, we follow Robin, who accidentally becomes the new assistant to a magical society, and he and his employer Edwin have to disentangle magical bureaucracy, but also, like, fall in love. In A Restless Truth, Lady Maud and magician Violet butt heads on an ocean liner back to England when a crew member ends up dead, and they have to work together to figure out who did the crime. And in A Power Unbound, a lord and a thief have to work together against a magical ritual that is hanging over all the magicians in Britain that may uproot magical society as they know it. I also love to see that gays being messy has not changed for many hundreds of years. These characters are flirty and funny and very complicated, very nuanced. Just like in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, there is some stuff in here on internalized homophobia and, like, what will you do to live authentically as yourself. I would also say it gets pretty spicy, you know, sriracha level. I would say don't date magicians, but damn, Freya Marsk is making that really hard to stick to. This next book is a bit unique because it is not overly spicy, though I suppose it is romantic, but it's darkly romantic. Like, sometimes you want, like, a cute little fluffy rom-com about two people, like, falling in love at a coffee shop, and sometimes you want to know that there is something dark and deep in the forest that would, like, burn the world down for you. And that's what this book is. For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten is one of my all-time favorite books. This is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast meets Red Riding Hood, but with dark, folkloric vibes and an eldritch forest that's gonna eat you if you bleed in it. Radaris is the second daughter of the king, which means that from birth she is known that she will be sacrificed for the wolf into the deep dark forest on the edge of their kingdom that is said to hold dark magic. However, the woods are holding more secrets than she imagines, and the wolf is in fact not a wolf, but a man. And once her magic is realized, she and Eamon have to work together to bind the gods of the old worlds that are threatening to break through the forest's magical barriers. It's lush and unnerving of magic in a forest dark and deep, yet also has a beautiful subplot on sisterhood and family and loyalty, but then also on religious fanaticism. And this love story is all about breaking down the man behind the monster, but finding out that you too may be a little monstrous. This has lower level spice, but I didn't want to put it in the low spice category because the rest of it is just so engrossing. I don't know how to describe that. This is like intimacy on a whole other level. I guess that's what happens when you're like linked by dark gods or whatever. Could you imagine if that was like the next stage of courtship? Like, me and my girlfriend, we've been together for about a year now, so we're probably gonna move in together soon, and then, you know, we'll probably get married at some point, and then after that, if we're lucky, we'll get bonded by dark magic. This also, I technically don't know where to put in this list because it is fantasy, but it's more paranormal in my opinion. maybe urban fantasy, but also where is the line? There is no line. We can make up whatever we want. There are no rules. But I wanted to mention this book because it does something different than the other books. She's not like other girls, and that is The Hollow Gods by A.J. Vrana. Ooh, our main man Kai looking like a freaking snack. Looking like the whole damn meal, honestly. In the isolated forest town of Black Hollow, a folkloric figure called the Dreamwalker is said to walk the forests at night. And even though no one really believes in it, local women have started to go missing, and university student Mia thinks that she's next based on a series of semi-prophetic dreams that she's been having. Whereas semi-magical wolf shapeshifter Kai wakes up next to the body of a recently missing girl with no memory of how he got there and a bloody past catching up with him. And full disclosure, AJ Vrana is a close personal friend of mine. However, I love her books because she talks very openly about communication. This is actually one of the books I mentioned in my Romantasy video of an example of how there is sex and intimacy in this book, but it is not supposed to be a romance novel. But as this is my video and I consider this a romantic fantasy book, it's on the list. Sue me. She has this couple talking about anxiety and PTSD and what they actually want in a relationship and working through their trauma together. And Kai is not explicitly stated to be, but canonically, I checked with the author, a romantic. So that changes the dynamic between Mia and Kai as well. So if you would like a side of creeping dread to go along with your spicy urban fantasy novel. And lastly, I saved the spiciest for last. I haven't been really giving anybody titles, but I do feel like these last three women are the queens. They are the royal court of spicy romantic fantasy novels. And I'm putting them last because these books are, to me, the pinnacle of what I want Romantasy to be. It is high stakes, it is tons of plot, it is a lot of world building, but the characters also want to kiss each other and like get down. The first of which being the Halfling saga, starting with A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair. Our main character Kira is a half-elf assassin to the High King who gets put on a mission to go into the land of fairy and like figure out some political stuff, but then oh my god, we find out that the king is bad actually, and that there's this whole rebellion, and like, who even are we? If you are somebody like me, who basically has a kink for fairy lore, no, I can't say that. My favorite type of fairy novel is the like corrupted nature magic, and not all these 7-foot-tall sexy men with wings and like 12-pack abs that the like fairy romantasy genre has become. Which, if you like that, totally fine. Just not my cup of tea. I can't date anybody over 6'2". But this series encompasses everything that I love. We get court politics in both the human world and the fae world, and then also we have an assassin struggling with who she is. She's also struggling with addiction. The intimacy that she builds with people is so strong. And then eventually the spicy scenes, they're like pretty good or whatever. And I love both of our love triangle contestants, and a large part of past trauma has to deal with a past loved one and grief, and that fully plays into how Kira sees and develops romantic relationships. If you are somebody like me who can't get enough of fairy novels, I would highly recommend this book. Now, if fairies aren't your thing, but men with wings are, may I highly recommend the TikTok sensation Ledge by Stacey McEwen. And don't get me wrong, TikTok has led me astray many a time. And it has not with this one. This follows a settlement of people who live on an icy, isolated mountain ledge, and every month the monster glacians will come down and take somebody from the colony, and our main character Dawson gets taken, but then once she gets to where they've taken other people, it unearths this magical conspiracy, and she has to escape, and she escapes with the help of this half-Glacian named Ryan, and then they are on the run. The promise of the icy embrace of the void is not enough to stop Dawson. She has an axe, and she is swinging that thing around. She's so cool and confident and capable, and I'm just like, hey girly, do you wanna like go axe throwing later or something? And her enemies to lovers plot with Ryan is a true enemies to lovers. She does not like him at the beginning, but as the two of them slowly learn how to rely on and trust one another, there might be some things that go on in a cave where no one can see when you need to keep warm. I don't know much about glacians, but like, apparently when they make promises, they deliver on them. Ooh! A great depiction of two people who genuinely have a bond and trust one another, but who also have their own agendas and will not step in the way of the other person gaining their vengeance. And lastly, the author, who I think is the reigning queen, nay, the pinnacle of romantasy, and that is Danielle L. Jensen. I'm a longtime fan of the Bridge Kingdom, and I recently finished A Fate Inked in Blood, and as soon as I did, I was like, hold on, DJ, run that back. I think this is a perfect romantasy novel. This is exactly what I want when I say I want a romantic fantasy. The Bridge Kingdom is a fantastic high political fantasy that centers Laura, who is put into an arranged marriage with the head of the Bridge Kingdom, Aaron, but little does he know that she's been trained since birth to be an assassin to take him down from the inside out. But of course, once we get there, oh my god, we're learning so much about each other and our kingdoms, and oh hey, maybe my father's bad actually. Romance aside, I love this book because the world building is so good. The detail is immaculate. And all these characters who are kind of bad people are making wild decisions, and the consequences of those actions are thoroughly explored, and those consequences affect the romance because we have these two people that don't trust each other slowly building trust, slowly falling for one another, falling into lust with one another, and then at the end of this book, there's a pretty big divide. And later in the series, we get The Inadequate Heir, which is a book written from the perspective of one of Laura's siblings. There's a whole forbidden romance between soldiers of opposite sides of this war that Aaron and Laura were supposed to end. And it's this whole mess of love and loyalty and war and righting your wrongs. And then similarly, we have her latest, A Fate Inked in Blood, which is a Norse mythology Viking-inspired story about a girl who has the power to channel the energy of a god, and she is forcibly taken to help this war effort with this king who wants to overthrow the land, and then she meets his son and a couple other warriors who also have godly powers. It's this whole book of like self-discovery and self-worth and like deciding who you're going to fight for. There's some fun flirty banter and some heart-pounding moments, and then so much sexual tension that by the halfway point you just want to yell, just kiss already! And Danielle L. Jensen knows the pulse of a good steamy scene. I'll just say she puts the same care and attention into her spice that she does into the rest of her books, and her world building is immaculate. And with those to wrap us up, that is that on that. Now, of course, this doesn't cover every single fantasy book with a romantic subplot that I've ever read, and some that I've read I don't like enough to recommend, and that's called personal preference. And like, I just finished reading this a couple of days ago, and I have many more on my list to read that are described as romantic fantasy, so, you know, keep an eye out here for maybe future videos. And as always, please leave down below your romantic fantasy recommendations because I want to read them. I just love books about love, but also books about like dragons and elves and like magical court politics. And sometimes when I'm reading a romance fantasy novel, or I guess a fantasy romance novel, it's like, yeah, finish kissing. I want to know what the thing that you, like that deal that you just struck with that Dark Lord that you mentioned like 3 pages ago and then like did not explain. And the author is like, but that's not important because we want the characters to get down. And I'm like, yes, I would love for them to get some, but also deal that I want explained. And then we just never get that explained. And then I have to come on the internet and rant. All of the caffeine just hit me at once. So we now know that this third cup was not a good idea, but it's too late to take it back. So maybe I'm gonna like turbo clean my house after this. You know where to click to like the video. You know where to click to subscribe. I hope you guys are all having a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you all next week. Bye!